Welcome today to our, what shall I say? It's an additional meeting that we don't usually meet at this time. I know it kind of threw everybody off, but we kind of got handed this bill last minute. And the good president wanted us to try and get this through today before everybody headed home. So welcome to Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources. We're going to take a look at House Bill 60. Excess wildlife population damage amendments. This was a bill that came from the Joint Ag Committee, and apparently there's nobody here from that committee, so we're going to see if we can hear from our good Director of Game and Fish, Director Nesvik. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Brian Nesvik, Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. So as you stated, this is a bill that came from the Joint Ag interim session. And I just found out I'm presenting this bill, so I'm going to do my best to highlight the background on the issue. We do have in the room too the Executive Director, Executive Vice President of the Stockgrowers Association, who is very involved throughout the interim. And I know he's planning on testifying today, and he will, I think, be able to help too with some of the details of the bill. And then I have the Chief Game Warden, Rick King, here too, who worked on a subcommittee with the Joint Ag Committee during the interim session to massage this bill and make some modifications that happened throughout the interim. And I will note too, Madam Chair, that during the session, there have been additional amendments on the House side that happened here over this last week. And just say up front, those amendments that were made on the House side made this bill easier for Game and Fish to work with, certainly. So as a little bit of background, there have been issues with over-objective elk herds and damage from over-objective elk herds for several years. This is something that the department has been aware of and worked on, and as recently as over this past year, we've really stepped up our efforts, and we've actually gone to some places that are pretty uncomfortable, places we've never gone before. We've instituted new auxiliary hunting seasons that are very non-customary, not like a normal hunting season. Outside of the normal timeframes, we've hired technicians to go out and remove elk. On private lands, we've issued kill permits to landowners to be able to, for landowners to be able to harvest elk that are causing damage. One of the themes that's certainly arisen throughout this interim on this particular bill is there are some things in place now to deal with damage, where elk or big game come in and chew on a haystack and create problems for landowners that way, or end up in agricultural fields where there's growing crops. But the existing process to deal with elk, where there's a lot of elk consuming normal forage on the rangeland, the existing process certainly wasn't working for a lot of landowners. There are folks that legitimately have had to reduce stocking rates and have been very challenged by having a lot of elk. There's a lot of reasons for that. In the past, we've always relied heavily on hunting seasons to manage elk and other big game populations. But there's, one of the primary drivers now that is a change is the landscape of land ownership across our state has changed. And there are folks, places that we used to have access for hunters to be able to help us manage elk that we don't have anymore. And so it creates a real problem for the affected landowner, and it also creates a real problem for the department.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Ellis.
I'm sorry, before we move too far away from the topic, I know we have the animal damage compensation program, and you just said that's not working. Can you put a finer point on why?
Go ahead, Director.
So, Madam Chair, Senator Ellis. So just to make sure we're talking the same thing, there's the Animal Damage Management Board. And that is a board that is separate from anything we're talking about here today. That focuses very much on predators and dealing with predator control and allocates money for predator control. That's a committee that's chaired by myself and the Director of Ag, and that's in statute. The program I'm talking about is a commission, Wyoming Game and Fish Commission program that's been in place for decades that deals specifically with compensating landowners when they experience damage from really all game animals. So if somebody has their livestock being killed by gray wolves or bears, this program compensates them for that.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead,
just
Sarah
to follow up, so when I was a young attorney, I did one of those cases, so I'm familiar with that. I'm wondering what part of that process doesn't work, or has been insufficient?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, so the portion of the current damage regulation that deals with quote-unquote extraordinary damage to grass is the portion that has been a challenge because the current definition bases the qualification on the past record. And it says basically you have to have more than the normal use from elk or whatever species you're talking about. So if you have an extra 1,000 elk and they're there for 5 years, or you just chose not to claim damage in the past, the current regulation doesn't allow you to qualify for this. And so there is a need to do something with that. And the commission's wrestled with this. It's very difficult. It's complicated to figure out how you fairly use sportsman dollars to go and compensate folks for excessive elk forage consumption. And the other thing that I'd say is there is a distinction, and I'm sure Mr. McGagnon will discuss this, between damage and just consumption of rangeland. That's really what we're focused on here today.
Senator Ellis, did you have another question, follow-up?
Along those lines, so I can understand a scenario where a landowner maybe hasn't filed one of those claims and then all of a sudden sees this what damage or consumption. We can get into the details of that. But what if they were to file this year, wouldn't that reset their baseline? So then you would look at it again for the next year after that.
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, the current regulation does not work that way.
Okay.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay, so I will walk through the major components of the bill. Did you just give me a new, I've got an engrossed copy. Is this the right one? Okay. Okay, so basically the first portion there on page 2 really deals with a sunset date and a new definition or a new term, extraordinary damage to rangeland. The previous in Wyoming Game and Fish Regulation term that I referred to earlier is extraordinary damage to grass. The rest of this page 2 discusses specifically how a landowner goes about claiming the requirements that are very similar to what's in existing statutes for them to make claims. On page 3, there's some new definitions. And so as you can see there, again, the sunset is mentioned of July 1, 2030, but then there's an actual definition of what extraordinary damage to rangeland means. And it actually means the consumption of forage normally available for livestock that is consumed by any game or any big game species, and it's specific to private land. That's one of the things that was amended on the House side. There's also a presumption that if the population estimate is over the commission's stated objective, that it'll be presumed that extraordinary damage to rangeland exists.
I got a quick
Director,
question.
can I have Senator?
Absolutely.
Has a
Just a quick question on that presumption. That's the presumption in the entire area. In any given time, in say an elk area, just use elk as the example, that elk area may encompass who knows how many landowners. So if the objective is that for that entire area, it's not specific to that landowner, is that correct?
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Baldwin, that's correct.
So as long as that, so he may or may not, he or she may or may not have had any animals on their land, but it's presumed because they're over objective. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Senator Ellis has a question also. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Madam Chair. Backing up to the July 1st, 2030, I'm wondering why that date was selected. We glossed over on page 2, line 21, reasonable hunting. We've added some subjective language there, and I'm wondering why. And then as this bill was worked in the interim, it seems like we're doing the things backwards, where you guys would do some kind of an estimate, and then the burden would then be on the landowner to challenge your finding. Now we've put a presumption of a fact in there, and then it's your job to unprove that. So this seems really backwards to me, and I'm wondering if, as this bill was worked in the interim, if that was discussed, why it's structured that way. That gives me a lot of uncomfort.
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis. So I think one of the important parts of what you just described is if you do go to page 4, it does give the commission the ability to rebut the presumption. That's on page 4, right at the top, lines 1, 2, and 3. As far as the sunset date, I can't answer that. I don't know how that date was picked. I don't know if the chief knows. Chief doesn't know either, so maybe we'll hear from others that can tell us that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead,
But that's what I'm getting after. I mean, it seems like if we want Game and Fish to go out there and do some kind of an analysis, you would do that. And then if the landowner disagrees, they would file some kind of, they would refute that. That burden would be on them to say that you're wrong. This puts a statutory definition in there that presumably favors the landowner, and then it's your job to undo that. That's where it's all on the burden of proof of who does what.
Director?
And it just seems odd to me.
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis. First, I will tell you that this language has been massaged multiple times, and this is where it's landed. This is something that we believe we can work with. The way it would work is that a landowner would come forward. The presumption doesn't mean you're just automatically going to qualify or be paid a claim. The landowner would have to come forward, make notification in accordance with statute to the local game warden, and say, I'm experiencing this damage. The game warden would then have to go out and make a determination and count animals and do an analysis of the area. The presumption just simply states that they're automatically qualified if the herd's been over objective for 2 years. If for some reason, there's an extenuating circumstance where the game warden says, no, they are in an over objective herd unit. However, they don't have the use on their particular place. That's where that provision that allows the department to rebut that claim, it gives them that ability. And all of these, when there's disputed claims, it's rare, it's about 3% of the time. The remedy for that, the first stop is with the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. And those happen, like I said, about 3% of the time. A claimant who feels like we made a bad decision has the opportunity to go and sit before the commission and make their case. And there's even steps beyond that. If they disagree with the commission, they can go to arbitration and ultimately to district court.
Can I go ahead, as long as we're at a stoppage here, and ask Director a couple of questions I had when I went through the bill on page 4. I know you hadn't got quite there yet, but the amounts that might be paid to compensate a landowner based on a private land lease rate, can you give me some ideas of what those are? And also, as a follow-up, was there any discussion on maybe a cap on the amount of damage money? Director?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I don't know that there was ever a discussion on a cap. And I can tell you that, in other situations where we have really high damage claims, most of the time it's with trophy game or with bears and wolves, that depending on the size of the operation, it would be difficult on the landowner to identify a cap. If they have legitimate damage on a large piece of ground, I think that cap would be problematic for a lot of landowners. Specific to, I forgot one of Senator Ellis's questions. I need to go back to it. So specific to hunting, that's certainly been a concern for sportsmen. And I know that those concerns were articulated, and that's why there was an addition made on the House side to say reasonable hunting, which I think gives the commission the ability to further define that, and actually they do right now. The commission says that you have to allow hunting for a reasonable trespass fee that allows enough hunters to be able to harvest the annual surplus, the annual recruitment. So if there's 100 cow elk and the calf ratio is 50, that means that that particular landowner, if he's affected or he or she is affected by 100 elk, they have to allow enough folks on there to be able to harvest 50 animals.
Okay, continue.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said, please continue.
okay.
Yeah.
So as far as on page 4, the private land, or I'm sorry, the lease rate, there is a tool that exists right now with NRCS that makes it fairly simple to be able to go on and put your place on a map, and it will predict an average amount of forage that's produced per acre. And that's what the department would use as a baseline to try to establish what's been lost, so that there can be a calculation of forage consumption. We know how much forage an elk eats each day on average. This tool helps us know how much forage is there. It's different around the state, depends on moisture regimes and where the property is located. And then the complicated part is determining the number of animals. And we've got a variety of ways to do that. And a lot of it rests on the landowner to provide us information as well. So continuing on, we are currently, when I look at section 2 there, page 4, line 13, in that entire paragraph there, this is something that's already in progress, and our intent is to have a 5-year plan for these over objective elk herds completed by, I believe it's September, Chief. And that will happen irregardless of this bill. And I would also say that, kind of in the same vein there, that because of this issue and the attention that it's received and some new changes, the commission will be acting irregardless of this bill. So rest assured, this is not something that the commission has taken lightly, and the commission's keenly aware of the problem, and so is the department. And it's not in the best interest of wildlife, it's not in the best interest of our private landowners if they continue to suffer these kind of problems. So, Madam Chair, I would stop there and continue to answer the questions that you or the other members may have.
Okay, thank you. I think Senator Baldwin has a question for you.
Just a quick one, and it's probably one you've answered 100 times, I'm sure, or 1,000 or 2,000. And that is, in which areas, just generally, are the elk herds, we'll just go with elk herds now, over objective, and are there areas of the state where they are not over objective?
Hey, Director.
Madam Chair, Senator Baldwin. So by and large, I'm making some big generalizations here. The problem is in eastern Wyoming, and particularly a lot of the focus has been southeast Wyoming right here, right out the door here in the Iron Mountain herd and up in the Laramie Peak herd. But there are other parts of the state too where there's some challenges a little bit in the Bighorn Basin. Generally speaking, where in areas with large amounts of public land, we don't have a challenge with over objective herds. We have ability to access them and with hunters, and we don't have a problem. But generally speaking, the eastern side of the state is where the most problem has occurred.
Other questions for the director or for Chief King? Do you have anything else that you'd like to add as well? No? No? Committee? Okay.
And just so you know, Madam Chair, Chief King has to step out and attend a meeting for me at 12:30, and so he will be leaving, not because he doesn't like you.
Sure,
Okay.
good. That's good to know. We're worried about that, so. Well, all right. Without, as long as there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and move forward and open it up for public testimony. Oh, go ahead. Come on up.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I know you have a couple.
Oh, gosh, they sneaked in on us. So yeah, come on up, both representatives. We'd love to have both of you come up. Representative Slagle and Representative Eklund. Yeah, we'd like to hear what you guys did on the House side to make this a great bill or a not so great bill. We won't know till we hear from you. Go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Alan Slagle, House District 2. And I did work on this bill in Ag Committee over the interim and was on the special force that actually spent time focusing on this bill. Is listened to the bill being discussed earlier, talking about the presumption, like was already said by the director. Presumption, basically, if the committee came down with the idea, if the herd is over objective, then we are just going to presume there's been damage. But we also put in the deal that the department can deny that presumption, say that's not true. I was out on your place, there's no sign of elk being there, so that doesn't work. So just to clarify that, then the compensation, if you look at the fiscal note, it gives you some idea of how compensation is figured. And so basically, it starts with the USDA recommendations of the AUMs per there. And then the department said, usually figure take half, leave half. And so if you take out 15% right off the top, just for, that's what wildlife on your place is gonna be. and then go to half. So then you're at 50% or so is all you're actually getting compensated on. And then originally, the compensation was set at 150%. That got amended out in the House. So it's now just down to 100%. And then you take it by the $45, which is the average is paid for forage. And so then your compensation comes from that, and depending on number of animals. And I don't know if, we had a constituent call in during our Ag Committee meeting and testified how that would affect his operation. And basically what he said is if he has 100 elk that's confirmed to be on his place, the payment would have been about $28,500. But if he didn't have those elk on there, he could have ran 50 cows. And with today's market prices, if he sold 50 calves, that would have been $75,000. So he was being, his actual loss was the difference between the $75,000 and the $28,500 by the department. And that calculation was, I was still before the 150% had been taken out. So that compensation would be even lower now. Just demonstrating the amount of loss private landowners are taking because of running the game and not being able to get them off.
Thank you.
I would stand for any other questions at this time.
Any questions for Representative Slagle? Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if this is a problem, and it just begs more questions for me, we have probably a question for the department, like how they calculate damage to grass. That seems like it's a problem or a definition that you use year in, year out. I'm guessing if this is a problem that we might see into the future, then why the sunset date at all? I'm just looking for a longer term solution than having these sunset dates. So why was that added?
Anyone want to comment on
Well,
that? Go ahead,
Thank you,
Representative.
Madam Chair. I think there were some on the committee that weren't very happy with the action the department was taking. And they were willing to give the department 5 years and thought maybe if they hadn't got the problem solved in 5 years, then we need to look at another solution. But I think that's where that date kind of came from.
Any other questions for the representative? Okay, Representative Eklund, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's good to be in front of you. It is a little odd that the Ag Committee would be involved in something like this, which certainly sounds like it would be something you would have. I was not involved with the same conversation Representative Slagle and Representative Kragle were in. They were on a special task force with the Game and Fish and others to try to come up with a good plan going forward and a good bill. But I was in on the earlier conversation that prompted the Ag Committee to get involved. We had producers that came to us, and the scenario is we're coming out of a drought. They were coming out of a drought, so you're looking at the worst case scenario where you have to cut your herd sizes just because of the drought, and then you have to cut them further because of what grass is consumed by the elk. Anyway, we have ranches, some new ones and some old ones, 100-year-old ranches that are in jeopardy of maybe losing it or losing the ranch and what have you, and it's time for the Ag Committee to get involved. And they're extreme circumstances, or we probably wouldn't have gotten involved. What I will say about Game and Fish, the department, the commission, they've been really responsive. The game wardens now are working with landowners, not just on rangeland, but other property damage problems that were around. And I do appreciate that, and I think a lot will be resolved. I believe the bill will provide incentive for them to push forward. If the department changes, commission changes and what have you, I think we need a framework of legislation that reminds them of what they need to do. And that's what this bill would do. And I'd stand for questions.
Questions for Representative Eklund? Well, you did answer one of my questions because I had the same question as good Senator Ellis here about the sunset. And I started thinking about it a little bit after you mentioned about the drought. And again, you guys have had more of a drought situation than we have had in my side of the state. And so that makes a little more sense to have a sunset because, you know, I know a lot of the animals were pushed down lower and stayed longer. I could see that every time I drove home last year, lots and lots of elk and deer and antelope that were along the interstates that I'd never seen before. So that answers that. And are you comfortable with the bill in its present form, Representative Eklund?
Madam Chairman, I am. A few modifications, state land was taken out of it. It seemed fairly simple for those of us that know how the state land works, but it probably wasn't for our wildlife people and others. So that's been stripped out of it. It's only private land. I didn't mention, so really all we're doing from the wildlife damage statutes is adding rangeland. And that makes it fairly simple, and it only involves private land. And so I believe it addresses a private property right. It addresses the need for us to have managed wildlife within those lands as well. And I believe that this will be a good tool going forward to incentivize the reduction in some herds. Some of the herds I didn't mention were probably 2.5, 3 times what they should have been. And so it's time to work on them. They've got a pretty good plan going forward, but it'll be slow, and it needs to be something we stick with until we get these herd sizes down to where they need to be.
Okay, thank you very much. A question, Senator Ellis?
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Madam Chair. So I think you're getting at exactly why I'm confused. Because we're adding to the list. Right now, the department shall consider claims based upon whoever the landowner is. And they say, you know, wildlife damaged my crops, my cultivated crops, and they put forth information, the Game and Fish looks at it, and from there I'm familiar with the process of how they say, well, no, we disagree with your estimate, and the landowner says, well, no, look at this, and you know, if they can't have a meeting of the minds, and there's a process for arbitration and a decision on the amount to be paid. That process makes sense to me. What mucks this up for me and my understanding is if we add rangeland to the list, and then we have a new definition when the other things aren't defined, like, well, then what does grass mean in these lines? I guess I don't understand the difference then between grass and rangeland, or how the Department of Game and Fish will distinguish between those two. And then this language about this presumption. That's what I'm struggling with, is why that's all, like, who makes this presumption? And then it's, you know, it says right here, the population estimate. If we left it without all these presumptions, you would think that the landowner would, in their claim, say, I estimated to have 100 elk on my property. Looking at your data, Game and Fish, this is only suitable for 50. Here's my claim. And that would all be fleshed out without all this extra language. So that's what I'm struggling with, is why all of this detail, and if we're just trying to add one extra thing to a list in a process.
Anyone want to answer that? Go ahead, Representative.
I'll take that. Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Ellis. Basically, the idea is monitoring grass is a harder thing to monitor, how much has been taken, how much is left. I mean, as a rancher, we do that on a daily basis, but we're out there every day monitoring it. But it's not as simple as saying, oh, the elk came in and just ate half of my wheat crop, and you can go out in the field and actually see that a lot easier, especially with the drought conditions that Representative Eklund was talking about. It's a lot harder to see that difference of loss. So that's why the committee put in this presumption. If you have elk there, there's presumed to be loss because of the numbers of elk on your property. So that's where that came from. Does that kind of answer your question, Senator?
Okay, she said yes. Thank you. Any other questions? I think Senator Jones has a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Representative, I just had a quick question. I got here a little bit late due to another committee meeting, but the livestock or bees that are killed by a trophy game animal. Can you explain that? Is that because you're saying they ate up all the grass, or could you explain that to me? Thank you.
Go ahead. Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Jones, so that's existing statute, that's not being modified here, that's existing, and it's not really related to what we're talking about here today.
Anything else that, oh, go ahead, Representative.
Madam Chairman, there was a question not quite answered from Senator Ellis, and that's on grass and the confusion we bring in rangeland. Grass, I think, is generally referring to meadowland, and would be my guess is it could be irrigated cropland. I'm not sure. Okay. We better get a distinction.
Go ahead, Director.
No, Madam Chair, it really is all things not growing crop or stored crop. So it's extraordinary damage to grass was originally developed by the commission to try to address what we're talking about here today, but the way it's constructed, it's not really working for the situation that we've described here today with just, you can't go out and measure this damage. It's easier to measure forage consumption. And that's kind of that's what we're trying to distinguish here in this bill. I think that's what the bringers were trying to establish.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Oh, wait, did you have one? No? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll go ahead and open it up for public comment now. You betcha. Thanks for stopping by. Sorry I didn't see you right away. Sure, that'd be great. I think we need you. Yeah. It's also known as the hot seat there in the middle. Welcome. Well, welcome. Please introduce yourself. Jim, are you going to go first?
I will.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
Thank you,
you.
Madam Chair. And Jim McGaggan with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association. Just a very brief word about the background of how we got here. Actually, a year ago at this time, I submitted this as a topic for the TRW committee. And you moved it forward. Then when Management Council came out with their final approval, it didn't include this. And it was so critical to us that we reached out to the leadership and said this needs to be addressed. And then they made the decision to put it in front of the Ag Committee. So we're pleased to be back in front of this committee as well. And a couple of things I'll try and explain maybe helps with some of the questions that were asked as we go forward. First of all, and I have one of our ranchers here who's been deeply affected, but I'll let him talk about some of those impacts in a moment here. But it's reached the point in a few different areas of the state where it's caused ranchers to have to significantly reduce the size of their livestock herds, and that's a clear economic loss. And every rancher that I know virtually is happy to provide some habitat for our wildlife. It's a part of what we value, but when it gets beyond control, and that's what has happened. And I honestly would say it's our belief that over the past 20 years or so, the Game and Fish has failed to keep up with the growth, in particular of the elk populations. Today, they're doing a yeoman's job of trying to address that. As they have admitted, when you're over 200%, as we are, for example, northwest of here, you don't get back to the desired population in 1 year. It's going to take some time. They have suggested perhaps they can do it in 5 years, and that's kind of the basis for the sunset that's in here at this point in time, hoping that will in fact be what can be done. The other thing I would mention is, and it does seem a little strange when you look at this, to have extraordinary damage to grass and then extraordinary damage to rangelands. The problem with the current law is that the way that's been interpreted, it's in with all these other damages. You have animals that are killed. You have fences that are torn down by the elk. You have water developments that are destroyed, true damage. And that's the way the law has operated in the past. And that's been very difficult to apply to just grazing out there. And actually, the language we had originally put in here, and then it's been changed since, and I think it still works. But rather than the new language talking about extraordinary damage to rangeland, we had talked about excess forage consumption, because to be realistic, this doesn't necessarily mean any permanent damage. What it means is that the animals are consuming more forage than we normally assume that wildlife will, and taking away forage that's critical to the maintenance of the livestock. So that was a more descriptive term to me. They're not doing any more damage than a cow would do, but what they're doing is eating the forage that cow needs to survive on, and in many cases forcing the landowners to either reduce their herds or spend more time using supplemental feeds and things like that. So, but we believe that can work. We're fine with reasonable hunting. That's not going to be a specifics criteria on every piece of land. It's going to vary by areas and that, but that is something we believe that the commission, which we have a good relationship between the commission and the ranching industry, that we can work that out in a satisfactory.
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Ellis. Can we interrupt you, sir?
Madam Chair, on the reasonable thing, that's what I'm struggling with, is why putting something subjective in there right now versus how it works currently. I mean, permitted hunting on private property, that's the practice now. So I'm just wondering why the insertion. I know the director said they think they can work with it and live with it, but I just don't, what does this add to the discussion, adding this word?
Madam Chair,
ahead, Jim.
Senator Ellis, that was a word that was added in the most recent amendment over in the House, and I believe was based on some concern that if you just say hunting, what does that mean? And that reasonable gives some strength to the commission and the department that they can, based on the conditions out there, if you've got 500 elk on you and you say, I'll allow 2 hunters on, that's allowing hunting, but that's not reasonable perhaps under the circumstances. So the feeling was that the insertion of reasonable set the basis for the industry and the department commission to work together. And there's no one number you could put in that's going to fit in every scenario. And that was the intent there. And we assumed reasonable without the word being in there, but we certainly had no objection to that word being inserted. To address just briefly the concern that was raised with regards to the presumption, as the way I understand that language is, if a herd is over objective, there is a presumption that excess forage is being consumed within that herd area. That doesn't result in a presumption that on my particular parcel of land, the consumption is excess, and that is based on my filing a claim if I choose to do so, and then sitting down with the Game and Fish and saying, okay, how much of this elk population is spending how much time on your land, and determining what the compensation should be based on that. So that's the way we see the presumption going. But if you're outside of a area that is over a population objective, then there's no presumption. If you're in that area, there's a presumption that the elk are consuming too much forage, but that still leaves open the issue of how much of my forage they're consuming versus forage on public lands or forage on other landowners. So we believe that, again, with some guidance from the commission through their rulemaking, is a provision that can work well. And about the only other one, of course, is the compensation, and we believe that that's fair, because that is saying, here's what someone would be paying. It might not cover what I could make off of my calves, certainly in a year like this, but it is covering what someone else would be willing to pay me if I were making that forage available to bringing in some livestock, as opposed to making it available to be consumed by the elk. So with that, Madam Chair, I would be happy to take any questions, or I would defer. Have with me today Mr. Juan Reyes, who's a rancher up here in northern Laramie, Albany, and Platte counties, and he's had extreme experience with this for quite a number of years, and has been very helpful, I believe, to all of us as we've had these discussions, in being able to give us concrete examples of what's been happening.
Thanks, Mr. McGagnon. I think we'll go ahead and yeah, please introduce yourself. If we have questions, we'll ask either one of you, I guess. Thanks.
My name is Juan Reyes, and as Jim said, we ranch pretty much in southeastern Wyoming. Very simply put, when we run out of grass, we have to cut back. If we run out because of elk overeating, I'm going to give you an example. Billy Ellis Hannah, we were running 200 head of cattle there. We had to cut that down to 100 head. That's pretty significant. Albany 12, that place is just getting hammered with elk. I'm going to put this in maybe a little different perspective. And when I started this, looking into it and remodeling, I said that the state of Wyoming is depriving me the opportunity of profitability. That's a mouthful, but that's how I feel about it. By not able to conduct my business, that's how I feel. And I'm very much pro private property rights, democracy, and capitalism. I would like to read a short letter, if I may.
Yeah, please keep it short, though, if you could. Yeah, go ahead.
This is from Tim and Jamie Flintner. I urge you to support AB 60 without further amendments, which they have been made. Many are suffering from damages due to numbers of far beyond objective. These damages are very real and extensive. If the legislature fails to address compensation or number of reduction, private enterprise will adapt. I'll put my 2 cents worth here. We'll be selling to billionaires that don't give a damn about the state of Wyoming. I think all of us have a say in our community, and we all have friends in those communities, and that's where we let hunters come into our property and hunt. My problem is I got more friends come hunting season than I have habitat. So, but nevertheless, that's really how. If we start shrinking that, and I wish I could convey this to the general public. If we keep selling ranches, which is happening in the state of Wyoming, to every billionaire and multimillionaire, which I have nothing against, I'm a capitalist, the first thing they do, they go buy a bunch of no trespassing signs and splatter it all over their ranch. Those guys don't really care what goes on in the community. They fly their jets in and fly out again. So that's a real concern that I have with how we are headed. And this compensation, as far as I'm concerned, is only good until we reach that objective. The present administration has really inherited a big problem. We're working very well with the present administration, Game and Fish, to solve the problem. I just wish I could convey to the sportsman that the worst thing we could do is take the mom and pa rancher out. Because we all have ties to those communities. I'll finish this letter real quickly. For our personal enterprise, we turned in almost 70 game coupons for the 2023 season, less than 20 paid for access. In addition to the remaining who hunted for free, we gave away upland bird hunting, fishing, horn hunting, waterfowl, and other forms of recreation on our property. The people and businesses in our local community benefit directly from our sharing our resources. These activities have real economic value. We defer to the benefit of the local and state economy. If we can be fairly compensated on our private property rights recognized, we're forced to pursue every dollar to compensate for losses. In the end, if you fail to recognize the state's responsibility to manage and care for its wildlife, you will create what you fear the most, a place where only the wealthy will have the opportunity to hunt. If ranchers like us have a historical ties to the community are forced to sell out, you are left with a new landowner. The person is not interested in raising cattle or sheep, but creating a personal playground. I've always said, if we want to make Wyoming the playground of the world, it shouldn't be at the cost of a few local ranchers. And this compensation would help us stay. Working closely with Game and Fish, we think within 5 years, we could have these excess elk taken care of. We're doing quite well this year. We harvested more than we did last year. So I think it's a program that's just going to keep some ranchers alive until we reach our objective.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes and Mr. McGagnon. The committee have any questions for either of these gentlemen? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and open it up for others to testify. Please come forward. We can take at least two at a time. Director Nesbitt, he's not, you know, he's not going
No,
to, he's,
this is much better than what I
please introduce yourself. Jess, do you want to go first?
I'm happy to. Jess Johnson, Government Affairs Director, Wyoming Wildlife Federation. I think I very much hear what is before you and hear the problem and have sat in and, we're working to find that solution. I would say that we came before you with another bill, very similar in the sense of it was us reaching across the table and giving a lot to make sure that those mom and pop ranchers are there. We really recognize the value of open working lands in Wyoming. A lot of this bill, boy, we have worked it. It has had, I think, 12 amendments coming for it. There's been a lot of issues that we've had. I would say that I still have great misgivings. We are against this bill, but I do really understand the problem. And part of the reason that this bill still just sits wrong from my point of view is that we are asking for a lot more dollars here of the Game and Fish without providing any more dollars. And to run you through a little bit of where these money comes from for damages, when you put in as a non-resident or as a resident for a hunting license, you have an application fee. Non-residents pay $15, residents pay $5. 25 or up to 25% of that goes into a pot that is statutorily set at $500,000. And that pot is used then to reimburse landowners for property damage, including what you read in this bill. That damage claim, if it goes above that pot, then comes out of essentially the Game and Fish operating budget. It has come out of that pot and gone far above for the last 10 years. I think it's been in the $1 million to $1.5 million to last year it was $1.9 million. So we only have that $500,000 pot right now to cover that, and everything else is coming out of the operating budget, which is taking away from time like management. I think it takes away from enforcement, it takes away from access. It just comes out of other places that we could be using this. So we could be using this other money to go forward and do these solutions. That 5-year plan that they have in place that has been working and starting to work, and we're all excited about to see work, we are taking directly from the department's ability to do that by just continually paying out in damages. So where a lot of my heartache comes from is that this bill addresses one statute, which is the damage claim one, without ever addressing the second statute that should be part of that, which is how do we pay for this? It's a self-sustaining budget. They've done an amazing job at keeping it going and making sure that hunters have a big hand at this table. But that is where the heartache has come in, is that we are happy to be at this table, find these fixes. I do believe in reimbursements and these kind of things, but not at the cost of our wildlife management and not at the cost of access and not at the cost of enforcement. So this is an issue where we need to come back to the table. And I want to be at that table. I want to work with them. I want to figure out how we reimburse them because it is a major issue. And I grew up, I'm the daughter of ranch managers. Those big working lands, what would Wyoming be without them? What would wildlife be without them? But for us, this bill is not how we get there. And we want to be at that table and help. But we are unfortunately against this bill still as it stands.
Questions for Ms. Johnson? I guess I just have one. So I get the impression then that you're saying basically if we up the limited quota drawing for our big and trophy game licenses, maybe to $20 instead of 15, that would certainly help that. Is that what you're saying?
You know, I think it certainly helps it in the short term. Non-residents took a huge hit upping licenses last year. A huge hit. And we continually to up cost to cover things. And I think there's a broader discussion to be had that isn't just on applications, but on, you know, what we value in this state and how we go forward with, you know, paying for what we need to, but also how we manage and decide what we keep around and what we don't. So it certainly gets at it a little bit. I know that I have an amendment in your guys' hands, but I would prefer to see this bill go back to the drawing board. I'd like to see this where we can get more creative than just pay money for this. I think we need to think outside the box and get a little more creative here.
Other questions for Ms. Johnson? Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Oh, whoops, go ahead. Senator Ellis?
Madam Chair, I think your request is a reasonable one. I think the hard part is, and this is where there's a little rub, is even if we appropriate these dollars, I think we heard from the testimony we heard is it's still not enough to cover what the actual loss is. So do you have a thought of a better way to peel that orange?
Ms. Johnson?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I have lost sleep over this. I think this hits both personally in both directions for me. It's the ranch kid and as a hunter. And I would like to say I have an answer to that, and I want to say that I don't. But I have a great belief in people sitting at a table around a bottle of whiskey, tossing ideas back and forth and figuring out how we, you know, maybe we do have to think outside the box and break the norm here. And I think that happens at the table, and very rarely does it happen in the middle of a bill session at this point. But I really appreciate that because I don't have a perfect answer there.
Thank you. All right, with that, go ahead, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Chairman Schuler, members of the committee. Holly Kennedy here today speaking on behalf of Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. And I will say I have very personal ties to this one. I'm someone that grew up on a family ranch in Area 7, you know, that northern Laramie Peak range that was mentioned earlier. And I don't remember a time when our elk herds weren't over objective in our area. This is a long-standing issue. My family ranch, you may not realize that you're familiar with it, but it is what primarily makes up that Laramie Habitat Management area. And so we allow a lot of public access, and we have a lot of elk, and there has not been a solution to the problem yet. And this takes great strides in the right direction. Healthy relationships make for healthy landscapes. And when that relationship is violated year and year and year again, and ranchers are asked to share the burden of this wildlife year after year after year, I believe going on over 20 years in my area alone for being over objective. And so when you talk about the financial burden of that, when you talk about the damage to the landscape from that, and I'll speak a little bit to Senator Ellis's question about the reasonable hunting. The majority of our problem in my area is because of that lack of reasonable allowance of hunting. We have lots of people that have moved into the area and bought large ranches to hunt on to get that coveted Area 7 landowner tag, and they come in for one weekend out of the whole season and hunt. And the rest of the season, there will be thousands of head of elk standing on some of those ranches. Then, when season's over, they come back onto all the ranches that do allow hunting. And then we shoulder the burden of those for the rest of the year. And so I understand the former speaker's point about this. However, inaction is not a solution. And I do think that there's ways to help Game and Fish better do what they're doing. You know, I will say it's not from lack of effort, but there are some huge roadblocks and there are some things that need addressed. But in the meantime, the ranchers are just trying to stay in business and just trying to take care of the landscape that they've been given. And the reality of the situation is, anytime you take a dollar out of a landowner's pocket, you're taking $1 away from their ability to do meaningful conservation work on their property. Every time they have to go fix a fence again, it's less time that they can spend on other projects. And so I would urge a yes vote on this bill. I think it's a step in the right direction for us all to be able to move forward and work on future solutions.
Any questions for Ms. Kennedy? Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate
Thank
it. Okay, is anybody else besides, I know Ms. King is here, but come on up, we can get 2 or 3 at a time. Go ahead, Ms. King.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. Sabrina King, I'm here today on behalf of the Wyoming chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and I've also sent you a couple of amendments, one of which is somewhat dependent on whether or not we are raising fees on hunters to pay for this. But I will say that our members also understand the consequences of over-objective elk herds. Many of our members are also working the land. They are ranchers. They are dealing with these issues directly. But I would say that I think one of the things that has surfaced in this conversation, I think more so than in the ag committees, which is interesting, is the broader scope of the problem that we're dealing with. It seems clear to me that how we handle damages isn't working for a lot of people. I will also say, as we have dug into the numbers and as I have looked at this, it is eminently clear that our damages program is not sustainable. And I think you heard about that a little bit, but I think if we add in this bill, there is no way that our damages program is sustainable. So I think in the broader scope, whether, regardless of what happens with this bill, frankly, I think we need to have a conversation about how we are handling damages, who is paying for that, and how we ensure that those programs are sustainable long into the future. We do have a couple of requests as it pertains to this bill specifically, and I think if we are going to increase fees on hunters to pay for this, which we would prefer that we not, but if we are going to, I have sent to you a proposed amendment. It was actually drafted by Representative Walters over in the House and was discussed pretty extensively there. But if we are going to be, as a sportsman's community, increasing our fees to pay for this, and the point of this bill is to get elk herd numbers down, we have to increase hunting, and we have to take dramatic steps to do that. And I think we've heard a lot today, frankly, about some of these sanctuary ranches where you have a couple of people who fly in, they hunt, then they leave, and you have the elk on that land. We have to deal with that. And I think if we are also going to be saying that we are going to be paying those folks for extraordinary damages to rangeland, we have to create an incentive for maybe some of those bigger, ranchers, folks who are maybe not actually ranching here in Wyoming, but to create an incentive for them to increase the hunting on their land. So that first amendment that I proposed, I will say, again, is a little bit dependent on, the increasing fees. But the other piece that I would love to see come out of this bill, and that our members feel pretty strongly about, is taking out that presumption of extraordinary damage. For us, that creates a huge issue in you do have some areas where they may not even be running cattle, but there's a presumption of damage to rangeland. And if they can show any damage to rangeland, they're going to be paid under this bill. So much of what we've heard about is an issue that relates to the impact to livestock owners. I don't think we're getting there with this language, and I think that it is a huge issue if you're talking about an entire elk area that is over-objective and you're presuming that there is rangeland damage. That puts the burden, as has been discussed, on game and fish. That is a reverse burden. I think from what we've heard, the people who have this damage and who are being impacted will be able to show that. That's not going to be a problem for those livestock producers. So we would like to see the removal of lines 17 through 23 on page 3. That would make this a little bit more palatable. But I think we have a broader conversation that we need to have. And I think every time we have tried to take big conversations and piecemeal those solutions, we've created more problems for ourselves. So I think we would love to see the conversation happen, but not with this bill and not today. Thank you, Madam.
Questions for Ms. King?
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
And maybe this is a question for the director. So if you get rid of that, the language that's, I think, helpful in Romanet 2 is for 2 or more consecutive years. So this is something I didn't get to ask, but I am wondering, this doesn't, I think there needs to be a little clarity, because how I read this bill was this bill won't provide relief until 2 years out from now. So, it takes effect on July 1st, 2024. So to get 2 years of consecutive data, that would push out any claim to occur in 2026. I don't know if I'm reading that right, or if the Game and Fish is like, no, this bill just takes effect, but we can look back to, years 2023 and 2022 for the 2 consecutive years' data. So I am kind of curious, Director, if how you guys interpret it. I think you could go both ways and probably need some clarity.
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, so we do collect a lot of this information on an annual basis, and we've got it back for many, many years. If this bill were to take effect, we would, in the places where we have the data, we would go back 2 or 3 years, and so that it wouldn't have to wait for 2 years to start.
Follow-up? Yes, go ahead.
The follow-up, Madam Chair, I think that language is helpful, and I think it's not as simple as just deleting Romanet 2. I think if you want to keep that concept in there and incorporate it into the definition in Romanet 1, that would probably make sense for anyone willing to work on this, if people want to go down that road.
Anything else, Ms. King? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Mulvaney, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau, sitting firmly in support of this bill. This has been a problem in some areas that has been going on for a long time. It takes, when you have a herd that is approximately 3 times what the objective should be, the local ranchers have taken quite a beating. And what this bill is designed to do is to get those numbers down, but it also provides a huge incentive to not let those numbers get to 300% of objective, to keep it down, to get action taken quicker. I think this bill does it. And to disagree with the previous speaker, I appreciate the presumptive language in there. And I'm sure the good director will correct me if I'm wrong, but the wildlife managers have a pretty good idea of what animals eat. For an example, elk and cattle of the large big game species, and with livestock, elk and cattle have the highest overlap. I believe like 2 elk will eat about what 1 cow does, roughly figuring. That's what that presumptive language does for me, is that if you have this many elk, we can presume they're eating this much without having to go out and try to measure it. Because if you have cattle and elk on your property, you can't, well, this bite was taken by this animal, this one by that one. So I like that presumptive language. But right now we've been kind of concentrating on elk, but let's think of a couple other species between, I call them antelope, proper name's pronghorn, but domestic sheep. Their diet overlap tremendously, hence the reason the Red Desert is such a great winter range for both sheep and pronghorns. They eat the same things. So that was another reason we added the word forage rather than grass. Sheep tend to prefer the rougher plants, much like pronghorn do. So that's why we use the word forage. But we can say, if you have X number of antelope, they're eating an estimated this many pounds of forage, that would have provided the feed for X number of sheep. That's where that presumptive the presumptive language becomes very, very valuable. And just a little bit on that, the grazing fee that's used. That's a survey done by the National Agricultural Statistics Service. I will point out that is the same exact thing that we use to set the value for grazing land in Wyoming for its valuation. So that is a good, solid figure. It's updated yearly. With that, sitting firmly in support of this bill, this is needed now. We need to get help now for these landowners. One thing I would add, I really appreciate that if you don't allow hunting, you don't qualify. I think that is imperative. That comes back from a gentleman a long time ago that was getting quite a bit of game damages, and it was determined, oh wait, he's not allowing hunting. So they put that in there. I think that is a great idea. And where the reasonable comes in, I'll use, it was testimony in front of the Ag Committee this summer. You look at somebody that's has elk, deer, antelope, whatever species you want, well, they're there during the summer. So what if he allows hunting? The animals aren't there during hunting season. So that's where that reasonable comes in. Well, so what if he allows 100 hunters to come on? The animals aren't there during hunting season. So that's where that reasonable comes in. We've been using that for quite a while. I don't know how long, but that language works. We can set that in rules. I have faith that the interested parties can sit down, okay, what does that mean? And that can be flexible. Quite often, we can change rules much easier than we can change statutes. With that, Madam Chairman, sitting in firm support of this bill, I would take any questions you or the committee may have.
Questions for Mr. Moline? Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for testimony. Welcome. Please introduce yourself, even though I think most of us know you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. Bill Novotny here on behalf of the Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association. We would just like to reiterate our support for the addition of the CREGO amendment specific to Section 2. We find that this is better language than what was in the original bill. And we also would like to share our support for that addition of that word reasonable in front of hunting. We think that's critical to give the Game and Fish and the biologists and the wardens on the ground the ability to make judgment calls about when compensation is warranted and when it is not, based off of many factors. So we think those are solid additions. He worked with Speaker Summers on that, and we do support that change to Section 2 as well as that addition of the word reasonable.
Question for Mr. Novotny. Okay, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. Appreciate it. Anyone else in the room? I know we have a couple online, so. All right, let's go ahead and let those in online, if you would. I'm not sure who's up first, but,
Madam Chairman, Josh Metten.
okay. Welcome, Mr. Menton. We're going to try and keep it to 2 or 3 minutes if you could. Appreciate it. Love to hear from you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairwoman, members of the committee, Josh Metten, Theodore Roosevelt.
I don't think you're, I think you're muted. Hang on just a sec.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Oh, now we can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Josh.
Chairwoman Schuler, members of the committee, Josh Metten, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Wyoming Field Manager. Sorry, I can't be there in person today. I'm with family, helping out my family, and I wish I could be there. Thanks for the opportunity to testify. The TRSP is on and against this bill. We recognize that this is an important issue. We have a proud tradition of partnership between private landowners, sportsmen, and the Game and Fish Department to work together to address issues like this one. And we recognize the need to support landowners who strive, and also recognize the need to involve sportsmen and the Game and Fish Department in doing this. I think, unfortunately, the way this bill has progressed and come around is we have lacked that partnership, and we stand in support of continuing to work on this issue and find ways to address that. Last year, during we traveled around the state looking at public land access listening sessions, and met with members of the Stockgrowers Association who brought up this idea of the importance of partnerships and working together on this issue. So again, as I mentioned, we'd like to do work on that. We're also really concerned about the cost to the Game and Fish Department and impacts that could disincentivize the ongoing work that's being done in these areas with over objective populations. As was said previously, the Game and Fish is put in an uncomfortable space with having to use different techniques to deal with this, and we need to support them and help them continue to move forward with these with addressing these populations. I also want to bring up that there are many other opportunities to address this issues. One example, Game and Fish actually mentioned in their recently released draft feed grounds plan the idea of occupancy agreements. There's also other grants available through USDA Working Lands for Wildlife that help cover the increased costs that landowners are incurring for dealing with wildlife on private lands. I just really think that this underscores the importance of looking at being creative and thinking of multiple of a lot of different issues or a lot of different opportunities to solve this problem instead of being stuck in a narrow range. With so many amendments, it's clear that this bill has a lot of issues, and while I think that it's got good intentions, I just feel like we're pushing through something that's really messy without doing the work to find a Wyoming solution that involves all the stakeholders that need to be at the table for this issue. So I think for your time today, and we are on and against this bill. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Menton. Do any questions for Josh? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Thanks for stopping in. Anybody else?
Madam Chairman, we have Carson Keyline.
Carson Keyline? Yep, welcome. Bring him in.
Hi, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can. And if you could just keep your comments to maybe 2 or 3 minutes, that would be great. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. I just kind of wanted to give some numbers to you guys so you guys understand. Oh, here we go. So you guys understand this is what they keep saying for extreme cases. The normal forage production out here on the eastern side of the state is roughly 1,200 pounds an acre. So if someone has a 5,000 acre ranch, do you guys have a rough idea of what you think the number of elk a rancher would have to be running to start to qualify for this, the bare minimum number for him to hit that 15% threshold?
Director, I don't know, you might be able to answer that. No, I don't think.
Okay, so everyone keeps worried about these numbers. To hit that bare minimum on 5,000 acres, you have to have be running 200 head of elk every day of the year. So this isn't everybody is going to be able to qualify. You have to have a legitimate concern and be running a lot of elk on your ground. So if you have 100 head per year, every day per year, I mean, that's still a lot of elk, but you got to be up over 200 to even qualify to start to hit these qualifications. And another thing I wanted to point out that was partly raised in the House was they were concerned about people just stopping ranching and running elk. That doesn't work with the way the layout of Wyoming's public and private lands are, and a lot of this eastern side of the state being Forest Service. I'm on the Thunder Basin Grazing Association's board, and for Forest Service permits, ranchers have to run 90% of their allotment or lose the grazing permits. And to keep your permits, you have to run 90% of the cattle allotted. If you don't, that goes to someone else to run cattle on. That ground has to be grazed under the multiple use access, or the multiple use acts for federal grounds. So it's the concern about people stopping running cattle and just raising elk and making money off of this AUN isn't really valid, because you have to be running cattle on that ground. And the way landscapes are, public and private is all intermixed. It's not just a pasture of public, a pasture of private. Typically, it's all intermingled.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Keyline from the committee? Okay, thank you for the information. Thanks for testifying. Appreciate it. Anybody else online?
Madam Chairman, we have Keith Kennedy.
Okay, go ahead and let him in.
Madam Chairman, Keith Kennedy on behalf of the Wyoming wool growers, and I hope you can hear me. Madam Chairman.
Our secretary is trying to do the work of 3 people, so.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I appreciate that very much. And I won't belabor the point. The wool growers are in full support of this bill, and there's little that I can add beyond what stock growers and Farm Bureau and the conservation districts have had. And with that, I'd welcome your questions, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Any questions from the committee? Thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else online? No? Okay. If there's no one else in the room, any last comments, Director, anything you'd like to add, or are we good?
No, ma'am, I think we're good, Madam Chair. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I think anytime you have an opportunity to sit with an appropriator, you should take it. Because what I'm hearing is concern about the fund itself that we pay for these claims. And I know that that's not a big pot of money. And so I think it is a bit of an unfair ask to take this on without asking where money is going to come from to pay for this. So just visiting with my appropriator, can we talk about the fiscal note just a little bit and what this means for your agency? And I think I'm looking at 1.675 million for each year. Can you talk to us about that?
Go ahead, Director.
Absolutely. Madam Chair and Senator Ellis, thanks for the question. So first, I will tell you that it is, because you have to speculate on how different ranchers may make decisions and whether they would participate or not. It is extremely difficult to predict the full range of fiscal impact. What I will tell you is we feel very comfortable and confident that that 1.6 million it's at least that amount. And we base that on current existing situations where we know it's highly likely that the program would be used. The range goes from there to, you can only imagine, because you just can't predict how many people may decide to use the program. So, that has long been one of our concerns. I will tell you that when the bill was modified to go from 150% of market value down to just market value, that relieved a lot of that burden, but the fiscal note is based on the way the bill is right now. So we know it's at least 1.6 million.
Go ahead, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, you previously testified, I believe it was you that testified to this, that you can use the data from previous years to help establish this if this bill became law.
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, we would use, previous population estimates to determine whether they qualify and at what amount.
So, for follow-up?
Yes, go ahead,
So,
Senator.
this is just following up on Senator Ellis's question. So if this goes live on July 1st, you could start seeing claims in fairly short order, correct?
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, absolutely.
So I guess from my point of view, and it's just trying to game this out, I understand the concerns, and I think they're real. I don't think they're not real or important, but I just don't see how you're going to be able to, how we can ask your commission to just come up with anywhere from $3 to $5 million unless we put it in here now out of the general fund. Because you won't be able to find out, you've got data on how many animal units and what the cost is, but you don't have any way to recoup that now. And so you're going to need at least 2-3 years to figure out a way through the means that you have to come up with those dollars to replace in your funding model. Is that not true?
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, so absolutely there is, but I would say that the model of the user fee model and having our existing revenue sources adjusted is probably easier than a general fund ask. You're an appropriator, so you have more expertise on that than I do. But the model, I think, of user pay is worked well for the department. When we went off the general fund, we were told run it like a business, and that's what we've tried to do. We just don't get to establish the cost of our product. We have to ask you for that.
Follow-up?
I understand. Yeah, I understand, Madam Chair. I just also very keen on the concept of unfunded mandates. And I hear about them all the time here. Unfunded mandate we get from the federal government and how much we decry them. Kind of loath to give you an unfunded mandate if this is as real as everyone says it is, and I have no reason to doubt them. That I'm just trying to figure out how we can, because when's the next ask? This is kind of a slippery slope for me. I just feel like we're all of a sudden just, oh, okay, they'll take care of it. And I don't think that that's necessarily prudent. So that's not something, wouldn't you agree?
Any other questions for the director?
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
I think that is my concern. What if that number is, and I don't doubt that it isn't, 1.6 million every year. I'm just nervous about how you guys move money around. And I would feel better, honestly, if we said, okay, we're going to require you guys to pay these landowners because of the damage that our livestock, or that our wildlife's doing, but we're going to pay for it. So I don't know what that looks like, 3 million plus for this biennium, and that's used exclusively for this purpose, but I think that would alleviate some concerns that we've heard in this room.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, so I really respect and appreciate the concern the committee has with our finances, because I share the same concern. A couple of things I would say is that, the bottom line is if this goes into effect now, I have a set of guidance to my team that we will always maintain revenue above expenditure. That gap, though, this year has gotten very narrow. We haven't had an adjustment to our revenue sources, with one exception last year that was very much appreciated, but certainly was not commensurate with inflation. But we haven't had an adjustment. So bottom line is if this goes into effect, we're going to maintain that gap between, and we're going to stay expenditure below revenue, but we're just going to have to reprioritize, and we're going to have to not do some things to make sure that we can meet the needs of a statutory mandate. I will say, the good chairman is aware of this. We are going to propose as an interim topic this whole notion of what do we do right now with Game and Fish fiscal planning. And I'm going to be interested if that is accepted as an interim topic and talking about a package that could be put together of multiple revenue sources that could help us become whole after what we've experienced over this last few years. So just know that's coming, and if it's approved, we'll be having that discussion in the interim.
Other questions for the director? No? Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and close public testimony. And any discussion on the bill? Well, I guess we better decide if there's a motion on the bill first.
Move the bill.
Okay, motion. Okay, we've got a motion by Senator Ellis, a second by Senator Jones. Discussion?
I have an amendment.
Okay, go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move on page 3, line 17. Strike the word, "It shall be presumed that extraordinary." Under line 18, strike "damage to rangeland has occurred if." In its place, insert "claim shall be based on." And then strike line 21 after the word "years." Insert a period, strike the word "the," and then delete lines, or strike lines 22 and 23. So, Madam Chair, the amendment would read, paragraph 2 would read, "Claim shall be based on the population estimate of any big game herd on the rangeland for which the damage is claimed exceeds the population objectives established by the commission for 2 or more consecutive years." And I would say there might be like a missing grammatical word in there. But that the claim shall be based on the population estimate is what we're going for.
Kelly, did you get all that? Okay. Any discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
I think this just gets it a little more consistent with it's, if the landowner's going to make a claim, they would look at this information and then provide it to the commission and go forward, and there wouldn't be this presumption language. And I appreciate that this part has been massaged, but we're legislators and that's what we do, right?
Any other discussion on the amendment? Okay. Those in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Say no. Okay, that amendment is passed. Any other amendments or changes you'd like to add? Senator? Did you say you had one?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Senator.
I do have an amendment. Yes, I guess it'd be,
New section.
yeah, a new section 3.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
A new section somewhere in there.
a new okay, or maybe renumber on page 4.
Okay.
Just to add an appropriation of $5 million from the general fund. If I get a second, I'll explain.
Second.
Okay. Did you get that amendment, Kelly? Okay, go ahead and we'll have some discussion on that.
I know, I feel very strongly about this until, so we have such time that the commission can figure out a way to absorb this and that they feel comfortable with it. I want to make sure that we're not overtaxing them, overburdening them. Like I say, I'm not saying that this isn't a real deal. As a matter of fact, I am saying it's a real deal, and I know it's real, and that's why I'm appropriating money to it. And not just passing the buck to someone else. So that's why. Thank you. On and forward, guys.
Any more discussion on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor of Senator Drew's amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that amendment is passed as well. Anything else on the bill? Any more discussion on the bill? Okay. Well, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and take roll. Kelly?
Senate files, or sorry, House Bill 60 engrossed. Senator Baldwin.
No.
Senator Ellis.
Aye.
Senator Garou.
Aye.
Senator Jones. Chairwoman Schuler.
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 no.
Okay. That is passed, and we'll take it upstairs and see what they want to do with it. The Senate may have some other interesting ideas, but with that, I appreciate everyone's testimony, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.